On a tea garden in late 19th century Assam, a worker moves down a row of waist-high bushes. Her fingers take the bud and the youngest leaves, then move again. The leaf is soft, slightly glossy, and already changing. Once plucked, it begins to warm, lose moisture, and bruise. Leave it too long in a packed basket or carry it too slowly to the factory, and its value falls. Bring in too little, and a measured task can become a smaller wage. The cup waiting at the end of this work may be thousands of miles away. In Britain, someone will pour boiling water over a dark, dry product that keeps for months and seems almost effortless. But nothing about that product is effortless. It depends on the timing of the pluck, control of oxidation, a nearby factory, transport to an auction, and a workforce that cannot simply leave when the terms become unbearable. So how did Britain reduce its dependence on Chinese tea and rebuild the industry in India? The familiar answer is a tale of stolen seeds and one daring Scottish botanist. The real answer is larger. Britain did not move only a plant. It combined Chinese manufacturing knowledge, tea already known and used by communities in Assam, colonial science, appropriated land, private capital, and a coercive system for moving workers. The leaf mattered. The system made it an empire. This is the history of true tea. Leaves from Camellia sinensis, especially the black tea that came to dominate British imports. It is not the history of every herbal infusion called tea, and it is not the story of one unchanged plant. Modern genetic studies distinguish several major tea lineages, including small-leaf China tea and large-leaf Assam types, with long histories of selection and hybridization. Even the botanical category contains more than one human history. For much of the 18th century, however, the distinction barely mattered to British buyers. The tea they wanted came from China. Chinese farmers maintained bushes, selected planting material, and harvested the leaf. Skilled processors turned a perishable crop into green and black teas that could survive warehouses and an ocean voyage. Merchants then moved the finished product through an elaborate commercial network toward Canton, the southern port where European trade was confined under the Qing system. Britain could buy this industry's output, but it could not reproduce the industry. The East India Company held a monopoly over British trade with China until 1833, and tea became one of its most valuable imports. Demand rose as taxes fell, smuggling declined, and tea moved beyond elite drawing rooms. It entered shops, workplaces, temperance gatherings, and working households, usually accompanied by milk and sugar from other labor-intensive commodity systems. British consumption per person grew more than fivefold between 1820 and 1900. That appetite created a strategic problem. Chinese sellers did not need comparable quantities of British manufactured goods, so silver flowed east. The company tried to alter the balance through opium produced under its control in India and sold to private merchants who smuggled it into China. The proceeds helped finance trade, including tea. Tea did not single-handedly cause the opium wars. Disputes over opium suppression, sovereignty, diplomacy, taxation, and access to ports all mattered. But the desire to escape commercial dependence on China was woven into the crisis. When Parliament ended the company's China trade monopoly in 1833, the institution lost a protected source of profit, just as private competition intensified. The next year, it created a tea committee to investigate whether British-controlled territory could produce a rival supply. Its first instinct was familiar: obtain Chinese seed, hire Chinese experts, and make a copy. But in the newly conquered northeast of the Indian subcontinent, British officials were being shown something their plan had not anticipated. Tea was already there. Assam was not an empty landscape waiting for a commercial crop. It was a region of forests, rivers, wet rice cultivation, shifting cultivation, trade, and overlapping political communities. The East India Company extended control after the First Anglo-Burmese War and the 1826 Treaty of Yandabo. That conquest changed the meaning of every botanical specimen collected afterward. A useful plant could now become a claim to territory. Surviving colonial accounts report that in 1823, the trader Robert Bruce made contact with a Singpho chief through local intermediaries and obtained a promise of tea plants. Later accounts give an important role to the Assamese administrator and entrepreneur Manoram Datta Barua, often known as Manoram Dewan. The spellings, sequence, and credit vary across retellings. The central fact does not. Singpho communities already knew, managed, or cultivated, prepared, and consumed the large leaf tea of the region. Camp tea communities also used local tea. British officials were not discovering an unknown plant. They were learning that people beyond their commercial system possessed botanical and practical knowledge they wanted. If you value documentaries that uncover the systems inside ordinary food, subscribe. There are many more familiar ingredients waiting to be seen clearly. Official recognition was slow. Robert Bruce died, his brother Charles continued collecting specimens, and botanists debated whether the Assam plant was truly tea. On December 24, 1834, the company's tea committee announced that tea grew in Upper Assam. That date marks a colonial decision to classify and exploit the plant. It does not mark tea's beginning in Assam. Nor was the Assam plant simply a wild version of a Chinese crop. The old story imagined tea radiating from one point and British science locating a convenient duplicate. Genetics now presents a more complicated picture. China-type and Assam-type teas reflect distinct domestication histories, later movement, and hybridization. Researchers still debate the precise geography and timing. What the evidence rules out is the idea that every commercial bush in India descended from a single British introduction. The Tea Committee nevertheless sent tens of thousands of China seedlings to experimental stations in Assam, the Himalayas, and southern India. It also ordered local plants gathered from Assam forests and moved into nurseries. These were botanical experiments conducted at imperial scale. Compare growth, survival, leaf quality, and yield. Cross or replace one stock with another. Then decide which landscapes should be reorganized around the winner. Here is the first reversal in the story. Britain's alternative to China did not begin with a smuggled Chinese seed. It began when a conquering state recognized the commercial potential of tea already embedded in local knowledge and ecology. The plant was present, but a plant is not yet a cup of tea. The next problem was harder than identifying a leaf. British officials had to learn how to make it behave like a commodity. Fresh tea leaves do not naturally become the dry, dark fragments in a packet. They spoil. Their chemistry changes unpredictably after plucking, and careless handling can flatten aroma or invite mold. The marketable product is a controlled transformation, developed through accumulated Chinese farming and craft knowledge. For black tea, workers first spread the leaves to wither, reducing moisture and making them flexible. Rolling or bruising then ruptures cells, bringing enzymes into contact with compounds in the leaf. Oxygen drives enzymatic oxidation, changing color and creating many of the aromas associated with black tea. Tea traders long called this stage fermentation, but it is not mainly microbial fermentation in the sense used for yogurt or beer. Finally, heat stops the oxidation and dries the leaf enough for sorting, storage, and travel. Green tea comes from the same species, but early heating limits oxidation. The difference is processing, not a green tea plant and a black tea plant. That sequence sounds simple only after someone knows how to control it. Withering depends on humidity and airflow. Bruising too little or too much changes the result. Oxidation requires judgment. Firing must halt the reaction without scorching the leaf or leaving enough moisture for decay. In China, this expertise was distributed through farming households, workshops, merchants, and specialist manufacturers. It could not be recovered by reading a botanical label. The company therefore recruited Chinese tea makers and cultivators. In 1837, specialists reached Assam to work in experimental establishments and train local workers. Their journey was not separate from the darker China trade. Research on the merchant firm Jardine Matheson shows that networks used to distribute opium were also used to obtain tea specimens, knowledge, and labor. The commodity Britain wished to replace and the drug used to finance commerce with China traveled through connected imperial channels. Chinese specialists encountered disease, isolation, conflict, and an administration uncertain how to use them. Some left or were dismissed. Yet their methods were indispensable to the first credible manufacture. Assamese and other local workers learned the operations, adapted them to Assam leaf, and increasingly performed the skilled work. In 1838, Charles Bruce produced an illustrated account of black tea manufacture at Sadia. It recorded a process already passing through several hands: Chinese craft, company experiment, local apprenticeship, and the particular behavior of Assam plants. Small consignments manufactured in Assam reached London, and an auction in early 1839 demonstrated that buyers would pay for them. The price was inflated by novelty and patriotic excitement. It did not prove that Assam could yet supply cheap household tea, but it unlocked capital. The Assam Company was formed that year and received most of the government's experimental gardens. A botanical trial was becoming a joint stock business. The early gardens still failed often. Imported China bushes did not thrive equally in every site. Knowledge developed for one plant and climate needed adjustment in another. Managers overestimated yields, struggled with transport, and spent heavily clearing land and building factories. Assam Tea's eventual success came not from copying China perfectly, but from combining local large-leaf plants, Chinese-derived processing, experiments, and machinery into a different production model. This changes the identity of the product. Tea was not a treasure hidden inside the leaf, waiting for Europeans to release it. The dry commodity was a body of knowledge. By learning the sequence, dividing it into tasks, writing it into manuals, and enclosing it inside factories, colonial enterprise made that knowledge easier to supervise and own. Yet the best-known episode in this history was still a decade away. In 1848, the East India Company commissioned the Scottish botanist Robert Fortune to travel beyond the Chinese treaty ports and collect high-quality tea plants, seeds, and manufacturing knowledge. Fortune adopted Chinese dress, used a shaved forehead and braided queue, and relied on guides and servants to enter districts closed to most foreigners. He visited celebrated green and black tea regions, observed processing, recruited tea workers, and packed living plants into sealed, glazed Wardian cases that protected them during long sea voyages. It was an extraordinary operation, and by modern language, it was botanical espionage. Fortune had no permission from Chinese producers to transfer their commercial plants and expertise to a rival colonial industry. Thousands of seedlings reached British stations in the northwestern Himalayas. He also helped correct a persistent European misconception by confirming that green and black tea could be made from the same species through different processing. This is why Fortune is often made the hero or villain of the entire transfer. The story has perfect dramatic ingredients: disguise, forbidden mountains, stolen plants, and an empire desperate for a strategic crop. But it distorts the chronology. By the time Fortune began his mission, the company had officially recognized Assam tea for 14 years. Chinese specialists had already trained workers there. Assam tea had been manufactured, auctioned in London, and organized under a commercial company. Most of Fortune's plants were intended for Himalayan experiments, while the expanding Assam industry increasingly relied on the region's large-leaf tea and on hybrids selected for local conditions. Many earlier China seedlings had performed poorly in the hot, wet Assam environment. Fortune's transfer still mattered. It strengthened tea cultivation in Himalayan districts, broadened the stock available to British experimenters, carried additional craft knowledge, and symbolized the determination to dismantle dependence on Chinese producers. But seeds were not self-executing technology. They did not clear land, build drainage, judge oxidation, make chests, move cargo to Calcutta, or persuade British shoppers to prefer Indian tea. The famous theft was therefore not the decisive answer to Britain's problem. It solved parts of a botanical and technical bottleneck. The larger bottleneck was organizational: how to hold enough land, capital, machinery, and labor together, season after season, in a remote frontier claimed by a colonial state. That requirement produced a system more consequential than Fortune's Wardian cases. Britain did not merely transplant Chinese tea farming. In Assam, it built the plantation. The word garden made the transformation sound gentle. A tea garden was, in practice, a territorial and industrial machine. Bushes required years before full return. Factories had to stand close to the fields because fresh leaves deteriorated rapidly. Roads, river landings, housing, stores, and medical facilities demanded capital before the first dependable profit. Investors needed secure, extensive land, and managers needed a workforce available when the leaf was ready. Colonial law helped provide the land. From 1838, so-called wasteland rules allowed large tracts to be leased or sold on favorable terms for tea. The label wasteland reflected the state's revenue vision, not an absence of human use. Forest access, hunting, grazing, shifting cultivation, and customary claims could disappear on a survey that recognized permanent cultivation and taxable title more readily than seasonal or communal practice. Clearing then turned a varied landscape into ordered rows, while timber fed construction, fuel, packing, and transport. Capital came through the Assam Company and later a growing field of firms linked to British managing agencies. They centralized decisions, raised money abroad, purchased machinery, and connected gardens to brokers and insurers. By the 1860s, more than 50 companies were producing tea in eastern India. Factory machinery made rolling, drying, and sorting more uniform. But one operation resisted full mechanization: selecting and plucking tender leaf without damaging the bush. At first, planters tried to obtain labor nearby. They complained that Assamese villagers and neighboring communities were lazy, unreliable, or indifferent to wages. The accusation concealed an economic conflict. In much of the Assam Valley, land was relatively abundant and households organized labor around rice cultivation and other local livelihoods. People might work for a garden when it suited the agricultural calendar, then return home. Some demanded higher wages. Kachari workers at one early garden struck in 1854. From the villagers' perspective, refusing permanent discipline for low pay could be entirely rational. From the planters' perspective, mobility was the problem. Tea required clearing, planting, weeding, drainage, plucking, and factory work on the garden's timetable. Managers wanted labor that could not bargain by walking back to its own fields. When local recruitment failed to provide that control, the industry imported workers from far away. Recruiters ranged across Chota Nagpur and other parts of eastern and central India, drawing heavily from Adivasi communities, including Santal, Munda, Oraon, and Gond people. as well as other impoverished rural groups. Land alienation, debt, famine, forest restrictions, and colonial disruption made recruitment possible. But migrants did not all enter for the same reason. Some chose a contract under severe economic pressure. Others were deceived about distance, pay, or conditions. Recruitment agents were paid to deliver bodies, creating strong incentives for abuse. The journey itself created dependence. Workers traveled hundreds of kilometers by road, river steamer, and eventually rail, often with families. Once in Assam, distance, unfamiliar languages, guarded routes, and lack of money made exit difficult. Housing in labor lines tied shelter to employment. Plantation shops and advances could create debt. Disease struck migrants during transport and in a humid environment to which many were unaccustomed. Official investigations repeatedly recorded inadequate food, medical care, and high mortality, especially in the harsher early decades. Law gave this dependence sharper teeth. Beginning with the Transport of Native Laborers Act of 1863 and continuing through later emigration laws, the colonial state regulated recruitment while also protecting the planters' labor supply. Contracts could be enforced through criminal penalties. In Assam, employers gained exceptional powers to arrest workers accused of desertion. A civil dispute over employment could therefore become confinement, imprisonment, or an extended term. Indenture was not identical to chattel slavery. Workers were not legally property. Contracts had stated terms, wages were paid, and workers formed families, negotiated, deserted, and resisted. But those distinctions do not make the system free. Penal sanctions, deceptive recruitment, geographic isolation, racial hierarchy, and employer influence over police and magistrates made consent profoundly unequal. Between 1870 and 1900, historians estimate that roughly 700,000 to 750,000 people were recruited into Assam's tea districts. Women were central, not incidental, to this workforce. Planters increasingly recruited families to stabilize settlement, and women performed much of the exacting field labor associated with plucking. Estates divided workers into gangs by sex and age, measured tasks, supervised movement, and organized daily life around the factory's demand for leaf. Children also entered the labor regime. The low retail price of tea was being built through the disciplined time of entire households. Workers did not accept this order silently. Desertion, petitions, wage demands, work stoppages, attacks on abusive managers, and collective departures recur in colonial records. Communities preserved languages, ritual life, music, and kinship while building new identities in Assam. Their survival was not evidence that the system was benign. It was evidence that people made lives under structures designed primarily for production. This is the film's central turn. Britain's rival to Chinese tea did not triumph when it acquired the correct bush. It triumphed when colonial government and private capital made land cheap, labor controllable, manufacture standardized, and distance manageable. The industry was transferred not as a single secret, but as a new arrangement of power. Now, it needed a market large enough to absorb what that arrangement produced. Assam lay far from Britain, and distance could still erase the advantage of cheap plantation production. Tea moved first by bullock cart and river, then increasingly through steam navigation and rail connections. Roads and the Assam-Bengal Railway linked gardens more tightly to ports. At Calcutta, an organized tea auction opened in 1861. Brokers sampled, graded, and sold large lots. Warehouses and shipping firms moved them onward. London auctions translated those lots into blends for wholesalers and grocers. These institutions did more than carry tea. They made unlike leaves comparable. Buyers could judge appearance, liquor color, strength, and price across estates. Factories learned to produce for grades the auction would reward. Blenders could combine teas from different gardens to deliver a consistent household taste, even when weather and harvest varied. The customer buying a branded packet no longer needed to know which district, estate, or season supplied it. Standardization made the plantation disappear inside the blend. Production grew with remarkable speed. Assam's output rose from about 6 million pounds in 1872 to roughly 75 million by 1900. Ceylon, where planters expanded tea after coffee disease devastated plantations, became another major supplier. In 1879, China still provided more than 70% of tea sold in London. By 1900, its share was around 10%, with India and Ceylon supplying most of the market. That is the precise sense in which Britain broke China's tea monopoly. China did not cease producing tea, and Britain did not erase Chinese tea culture. What collapsed was China's practical dominance over British supply. A country that had once been unable to make tea had used colonial territory to build competing production under British commercial control. Price and distribution were only part of the victory. Consumers also had to be taught that imperial tea was desirable. Merchants and industry organizations advertised Indian and Ceylon teas as strong, pure, modern, and British in political identity, despite the Asian land and labor that made them. Exhibitions, grocers, branded packets, and patriotic campaigns turned origin into a selling point. During Queen Victoria's 1887 Jubilee, promoters deliberately linked Indian tea to imperial celebration. The flavor reaching households also changed. Strong black teas blended well with milk and sugar and produced a dependable cup quickly. By 1900, annual British consumption averaged about 5.9 pounds per person, compared with 1.1 pounds in 1820. Tea fitted factory breaks, domestic routines, temperance culture, and the expanding grocery trade. It offered stimulation, warmth, and a setting for sociability. But claims that tea alone powered industrialization or made urban water safe turn a complex history into another comforting myth. Its success depended on income, taxation, sugar, fuel, retail networks, working schedules, and changing ideas of respectability. There was one final irony. India had become essential to Britain's tea habit before tea became an everyday commercial drink for most people in India. At the beginning of the 20th century, the Indian market absorbed only a small fraction of what Britain consumed. The colony was first organized as a field and factory for someone else's cup. Tea companies eventually looked for customers closer to the gardens. In the early 20th century, market expansion campaigns brought demonstrations to railway stations, fairs, factories, and towns. Advertisements appeared in Indian languages. Vendors sold tea in small, affordable servings. Consumers adapted the commodity to local preferences, with varying amounts of milk, sugar, and spices. This was not Britain teaching a continent to drink an entirely unknown plant. Communities in northeast India had used tea before the plantations, and other regional histories of infusions and medicinal use predated mass marketing. Nor did one campaign invent a timeless national recipe called chai. Commercial tea became Indian through uneven, creative adoption. Strong, factory-made black tea, especially the granular crush-tier curl style that later dominated Indian production, suited quick extraction and mixtures with milk and sugar. Local practice transformed an export crop into many everyday drinks. Political rule changed, but the plantation did not vanish at independence. Estate boundaries, labor lines, managerial hierarchies, and communities descended from migrants remained. Post-colonial laws imposed welfare duties on plantations, and Indian ownership expanded, yet disputes over wages, housing, healthcare, land rights, and the cost of legally mandated benefits continued. The descendants of indentured workers were no longer temporary migrants. They had become part of Assam, even as recognition and political belonging remained contested. The modern industry is also less uniform than the old image of a vast estate suggests. Tea Board of India's 2024-25 report counted roughly 249,000 small growers, who supplied more than half of national production. Estates and bought leaf factories, auctions, private contracts, blenders, testing laboratories, warehouses, ports, and retailers all help turn variable fresh leaf into a standardized product. In the organized estate sector, the same report counted about 1.15 million workers, more than half of them women. Hand plucking remains visible because the tenderness and position of the leaf still matter, even when factory processing is mechanized. This system has made tea abundant, but abundance is not permanence. Growers face volatile prices, rising costs, pests, and weather made less predictable by climate change. Workers can remain dependent on estates for services that other citizens receive from public systems. Small growers may carry production risk while selling perishable leaf to a limited number of factories. A tea bag can be cheap because efficiency is real. It can also be cheap because environmental and social costs are kept far from the buyer. And China was never permanently displaced. In 2024, it produced more than half the world's tea, while India produced about 18%. The 19th century reversal was not a final defeat of Chinese tea. It was the creation of an alternative imperial supply chain, powerful enough to capture Britain's market and then reshape consumption in many other places. So how did Britain reduce its dependence on China? It combined elements that had never belonged to Britain alone. From Chinese producers came cultivated material and deep processing knowledge. From Singpho and other communities in Assam came knowledge of a local tea ecology that colonial accounts first treated as a resource to be claimed. From imperial science came classification, experiment, and covert collection. From conquest came land law. From investors came factories and managing agencies. From the colonial state came labor recruitment and penal enforcement. From workers came the planting, plucking, carrying, manufacture, resistance, and community life, without which no chest reached an auction. Steamers, railways, brokers, blenders, advertisers, and millions of consumers completed the machine. Return to the worker at the opening. A hand chooses a bud and tender leaves before the factory clock outruns their freshness. That small gesture still sits at the beginning of much of the world's tea. What changed was everything built around it: who controlled the bush, who could leave the garden, where the leaf traveled, and whose knowledge appeared on the packet. The empire in the cup was never one stolen plant. It was a system built to make plants, skills, land, and people move on Britain's terms, and to make the result taste ordinary.